Welcome to your deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're getting into the idea of likability,
Yeah.
or really how to be more likable using psychology.
And how to do that authentically.
Right. No cheesy pickup lines here.
Exactly. We're diving deep into some fascinating psychology today.
We're going to unlock your inner social butterfly today with the help of psychology expert Matsumi and their 5 principles for being more likable.
I like how Matsumi structures their insights like a countdown.
Yeah.
Kind of builds that anticipation from
Why?
the 5th principle to the most impactful one.
Yeah, and we're going to follow that countdown too.
Okay.
Saving the best for last.
Love it.
But first up,
Yeah.
number 5, the mere exposure effect.
Ah, the mere exposure effect.
Have you heard of this one?
Oh, yeah. It reveals a fascinating quirk of our brains.
Okay.
The more we experience something, the safer and more comfortable we feel with it.
Okay.
And, familiarity often translates into fondness.
Like that saying, familiarity breeds fondness. But Matsumi takes it a step further, like how this principle affects just our regular everyday interactions.
Like, imagine you see the same stranger every day on your commute.
Okay.
One day, they're not there, and you think, huh, I wonder where they went.
Yeah. You don't even know this person, but it's like they're part of your routine now.
Exactly. And this happens because our brains are constantly scanning for potential threats.
Right.
When we encounter someone repeatedly in a non-threatening way, our brains essentially label them as safe.
So it's not about just physical presence, but like consistent, non-threatening presence.
Yes,
Yes.
precisely.
Interesting.
A sense of safety can then bleed into our perception of that person, making us like them more.
Wow.
It's a subconscious link between familiarity and fondness.
So we're hardwired to find comfort in the known, even if it's just a familiar face on our commute.
Yes.
Makes you think about the effort we put into building relationships. It's not always about these big, grand gestures, is it?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
The mere exposure effect reminds us that even small, consistent interactions can strengthen our bonds.
Just showing up.
Showing up regularly, whether it's for coffee dates, sending a quick text, or simply being present during conversations, it all adds up.
I like that.
Yeah.
Now that's something we can all apply.
Right.
Okay, ready for number 4 on the countdown?
Yes. Give me.
This one's called the Ben Franklin effect.
Okay.
And I have to admit, this one really made me scratch my head at first.
Oh, the Ben Franklin effect is fascinating. It flips the script on what we think makes us likable.
Right, like we assume doing favors for others is the key.
Right.
But this principle suggests otherwise.
Totally. Like, asking for small favors can actually make someone like you more.
It seems so counterintuitive.
It does.
But Matsumi breaks it down brilliantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me more.
Okay, so the act of helping, even in a small way, creates a sense of investment in the person we've helped.
Okay.
It's like our minds subconsciously think, well, I did them a favor, so I must have a positive association with them.
So they're trying to convince themselves they like you?
Yes.
Which then makes them like you more.
Exactly.
Mind-blowing.
Right. And it doesn't require grand gestures either.
Okay.
Matsumi gives the example of borrowing a phone charger from a stranger at a coffee shop.
Oh, okay.
That simple act of kindness, while seemingly insignificant, can actually spark a connection.
It's like hacking the social matrix.
Yeah.
But in a good way.
Exactly.
Creating these tiny obligations can lead to bigger connections.
I love that.
Yeah, and I'm starting to see how all of these principles kind of intertwine.
Yeah.
Speaking of connections, let's move on to number 3, the reciprocity principle.
Ah, reciprocity.
This one is really ingrained in us, isn't it?
It is. It goes way back to our earliest ancestors.
You scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Exactly.
And that age-old wisdom.
It's about building social capital through genuine acts of kindness and consideration.
Okay, so how does Matsumi connect this with likability?
They share this story about a friend who's a fantastic listener. People naturally gravitate towards him. They confide in him, want to spend time with him. His listening becomes a currency.
It's like he's making a social investment without realizing it.
Exactly.
Just by being a good listener, he's creating a ripple effect of positive interactions.
Exactly. It creates this beautiful cycle of give and take, which strengthens the bond between people.
It's not about keeping score, though, is it?
No, not at all. It's about approaching relationships with generosity.
It's about genuinely wanting to connect, to give, without expecting anything in return.
Yes. And often, that's when we receive the most in return.
It's fascinating how these principles play out in our lives.
I know. It's amazing.
It really is. It's like we're getting the cheat codes to genuine connection.
Totally.
Okay, ready for number 2?
I am. Lay it on me.
This one is called spontaneous trait transference.
Ooh, that's a good one.
This one highlights how our words, even when directed at others, can shape how people see us.
It's true.
It's a bit like karma. You know what you put out into the world comes back to you. But how does it work?
It's all about association.
Okay.
Let's say someone is constantly complaining or bad-mouthing others.
Okay.
People start to associate those negative traits with that person, even if their words aren't directed at the listener.
So it's not just about negativity, but gossiping
Right.
can make you less likable.
Yes.
That's something I never really considered.
It's true. But on the flip side, if someone constantly praises others or highlights positive attributes, those positive traits become associated with them.
Okay.
People start to see them in a more positive light.
It's a powerful reminder to be mindful of our words in social settings.
It really is.
We are constantly shaping how others see us, even when we don't realize it.
Constantly, yeah.
It makes you wonder how often we unintentionally sabotage our likability just by not being conscious of our words.
Right.
And this leads us to the #1 principle on Matsumi's countdown, the similarity principle.
Ooh, the big one.
The big one. This principle really dives into our desire to find common ground and how that drives connection. So true.
Okay, so tell me about this one.
Okay, so the similarity principle taps into a fundamental human need, the
Yeah.
need to belong.
Okay.
We're naturally drawn to those who share our values, interests, and experiences.
Okay.
Think about that instant connection you feel when you meet someone who's read your favorite book or shares your love for a particular band.
Right. It's like that Me Too moment that sparks kinship.
Exactly. It's that Me Too moment that sparks a sense of kinship.
I like that.
It is.
Matsumi uses the example of sharing a birthday,
Yeah.
which I thought was interesting because it's just a date on the calendar.
Yeah, but it's something in common.
Right.
It's crazy how our brains latch onto these seemingly small similarities.
Right.
They act as shortcuts to connection, triggering a feeling of, you get me.
It's like a secret handshake with a stranger.
Exactly.
But what about when those obvious similarities aren't there? How can we apply this more intentionally?
That's a great question.
Matsumi suggests paying attention to the subtler ways we can create that we're on the same wavelength vibe.
Okay.
For example, mirroring someone's tone of voice or using phrases like, I feel the same way, or that resonates with me, can create a sense of shared understanding.
So it's not about pretending to be someone we're not,
No,
but finding that common ground and reflecting it back to the other person.
precisely. It's about actively looking for those points of connection and then highlighting them in a way that feels natural and authentic.
This is making me rethink all those awkward silences in social situations.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe instead of panicking, I should be searching for those Me Too moments.
I love that. Yes. And the beauty of these 5 principles is that they empower us to be more proactive in our interactions.
Okay.
We're not just passive recipients of social cues. We can actually influence how people perceive us and shape our own social experiences.
I like that a lot.
Right.
We've covered a lot.
Yeah.
The mirror exposure effect, the Ben Franklin effect, the reciprocity principle, spontaneous trait transference, and the similarity principle.
That was great.
These are incredible tools for boosting likability.
Yes. And the most exciting part,
What's that?
these principles aren't just abstract ideas.
Okay.
They're actionable strategies that we can start implementing in our lives today.
This isn't just a theoretical deep dive. It's a practical guide to unlocking our most authentic, likable selves.
Exactly. It's about understanding the subtle psychological mechanisms that drive human connection
Hmm.
and then using that knowledge to cultivate deeper, more meaningful relationships.
I love how Matsumi emphasizes that it's not about manipulation or trickery.
Right.
It's about being genuine.
It's about recognizing that we all crave connection, belonging, and understanding.
Yes.
And by tapping into these universal human needs, we can create more positive, fulfilling social interactions for ourselves and those around us.
I think you're right.
Yeah,
This has been such an eye-opening conversation for me.
me too.
I have a whole new perspective on likability now.
It's cool how psychology can provide us with such practical insights into something as intangible as likability.
Yeah, it is. Before we wrap up, I have one final thought I'd love to bounce off of you.
I'm all ears. What's on your mind?
We've mainly focused on how these principles can help us build new connections.
Right.
But what about our existing relationships?
Yeah.
Could consciously applying these principles help to strengthen the bonds we already have?
That's a brilliant question.
Yeah.
I think it absolutely could.
Okay.
Imagine consciously using the Ben Franklin effect to ask a loved one for a small favor.
Okay.
Not because you actually need the help,
Okay.
but just as a way to make them feel valued and appreciated.
Right.
How good would that feel?
That's good.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even just being more mindful of spontaneous trait transference, speaking positively about others in front of our loved ones could subconsciously make them associate those positive qualities with us.
Like we talked about.
Right.
Yeah.
And the mere exposure effect takes on a whole new meaning in the context of long-term relationships.
Oh, how so?
It's a reminder that consistency, presence, and those small everyday interactions are what truly nourish our bonds over time.
It's like that saying, relationships are like gardens. They need tending to thrive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about in terms of my own relationships, both new and old.
Me too. And at the end of the day, isn't that the mark of a truly valuable deep dive? That it leaves us with more questions than answers and a renewed sense of curiosity about ourselves and the world around us.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of likability.
It's fascinating how our brains latch onto these seemingly small similarities. They act as shortcuts to connection, triggering a feeling of, you get me.
It's like a secret handshake with a stranger. But what about when those obvious similarities aren't there? How can we apply this principle more intentionally? That's a great question. Um, Matsumi suggests paying attention to the subtler ways we can create that we're on the same wavelength vibe, like mirroring someone's tone of voice,
Okay.
or using phrases like, I feel the same way, or that resonates with me.
Yeah.
Those can create a sense of shared understanding.
So it's not about pretending to be someone we're not,
Right.
but finding that common ground and reflecting it back to the other person.
Precisely. It's about actively looking for those points of connection and then highlighting them in a way that feels natural and authentic.
This whole conversation is making me rethink those awkward silences in social situations. Maybe instead of panicking, we should be searching for those Me Too moments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the beauty of these 5 principles is that they empower us to be more proactive in our interactions. We're not just passive recipients of social cues. We can actually influence how people perceive us and shape our own social experiences.
Okay, let's recap for a second. We've covered all 5 principles: the mere exposure effect, the Ben Franklin effect, the reciprocity principle, spontaneous trait transference, and the similarity principle, all incredible tools for boosting likability.
And the most exciting part, these principles aren't just abstract ideas.
True.
They're actionable strategies that we can start implementing in our lives today.
Exactly. This isn't just a theoretical deep dive, it's a practical guide to unlocking our most authentic, likable selves.
Exactly. It's about understanding the subtle psychological mechanisms that drive human connection and then using that knowledge to cultivate deeper, more meaningful relationships.
And I like how Matsumi emphasizes that it's not about manipulation or trickery.
Right.
It's about bringing our most genuine, empathetic selves to the table.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we all crave connection, belonging, and understanding. And by tapping into these universal human needs, we can create more positive, fulfilling social interactions for ourselves and those around us.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on likability.
Me too. It's fascinating how psychology can illuminate these often overlooked aspects of human behavior.
Before we wrap up, I have one final thought I'd love to bounce off of you.
I'm all ears. What's on your mind?
We've mainly focused on how these principles can help us build new connections.
Right.
But what about existing relationships? Could consciously applying these principles help to strengthen the bonds we already have?
Yeah, so we've been talking about these 5 principles from Matsumi: the mere exposure effect, the Ben Franklin effect, the reciprocity principle, spontaneous trait transference, and the similarity principle, and how we can use them to be more likable.
And I think what's really important is we're talking about how to do this ethically. It's not about manipulating people. It's about being your most genuine self.
Exactly. And it's amazing how psychology can teach us so much about something like likability, which you think would be hard to pin down.
It really is fascinating.
It is. This deep dive has given me so much to think about, and I hope it's been helpful for you too.
Me too. It's a reminder that we can all become more likable. And it doesn't mean changing who we are.
Exactly.
It's about connecting with people in a genuine way. And maybe psychology can help us do that.
Totally. We all need connection and belonging, and when we recognize that, we can start to build better relationships with everyone around us.
Well said. And on that note, this has been our deep dive into the world of likability.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, happy connecting.